Today I'm going to talk about ekistics and using, trying to explore its anthropocentric dimensions, if there are any of those. So I will start with the man's, Doxiadis' words, that comments on the feelings of stress and confusion that the modern man of the 60s of that time has while living in the city. And I quote, so he says, "Personally, I'm convinced that the root of all problems in our cities lies in our minds, in our loss of belief in man, and in his ability to set goals and to implement them." The paper that I'm presenting here, the presentation, aims at exploring the anthropocentric dimensions of ekistics, if any, by tracing the origins and evolution of the novel for its time science of human settlement that emerged in late 40s, early 50s, and by revisiting the affinities of this urban approach to sociology, and to explore these in Doxiadis' writings, to explore these affinities and these dimensions. The suggested stream of research stems from the criticism that had been made against ekistics and reflectively against or towards, let's say, its main inspirer Doxiadis as encouraging almost technology fetishism only, with little respect to the social consequences of this action. This paper addresses the criticism and reflects on Doxiadis' attitudes about social and sociological matters. By revisiting Doxiadis' reasoning with a view on its humanistic agenda, this paper could suggest that this approach could be one promising line for informing current urban discourses, practices, and policies, considering the similarities in historic, economic, and social circumstances between now and then. And we mean, with then, I mean the era after the Second World War, when the science was emerging, and how this applied in 60s and 70s in the numerous design schemes worldwide. The term humanistic here is adopted to describe the concern for human life and its environment. It is related with the term as it was used by the historians of the 19th century to label the shift in focus of study that occurred circa 13th century in European academia from a chivalry study of nobility and scholastic study of clergy to an all-round study of life according to current needs. However, it is acknowledged that since the 18th century, humanism has been used, was used with a broader sense to describe the glorification of the human nature and life of this world over the dominance of the otherworldly values that existed during the Middle Ages. Now, this paper is based on the conjecture, on the hypothesis that although ekistics thought to provide a sound theoretical foundation for conceptualizing and managing the world, important aspects of it have been largely forgotten. It will be argued that this could be partly because it was not sufficiently researched, perhaps as a result of being out of step with the emerging orthodoxies in urban planning in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which increasingly favored small-scale interventions somehow, and partly because Doxiadis' close association with futuristic radical thinkers shifted the focus of the approach and blurred the origins of the scope of the emerged science. Now, I'm going to say something about the critique that was made against Doxiadis' both theoretical approach and the practice, and how this theory was implemented on real-life projects. So overall, the criticism that was expressed towards Doxiadis' approach to analyzing the human settlements and to prescribing future urban development by using ekistics, values, and principles, is that he used a mere epistemological approach with idiosyncratic characteristics, questionable assumptions and assertions for many scholars, and thus detaching itself from mainstream disciplines of architecture and town planning. For Mark Quigley, in his article Network Fever, the understanding of ekistics as an urban approach is summarized on the prevalence of networks against the physical space, which can be only seen if it's caught by the net. This particular concern with the networks stemmed from the early Doxiadis conception of a settlement as an evolving biological and technological organism bearing networks of nerves and arteries, mainly representing patterns of movement. According to quickly, it was being crystallized, this infatuation, if you like, with networks, was being crystallized in the City of the Future project launched in the 1960s, funded by the Ford Foundation, that predicted the emergence of a single city covering the whole Earth like a fluid, biomorphic flow, extending itself everywhere. In Wigley's words, this radical confusion of architectural networks had been apparent with the meeting of Richard Buckminster Fuller, or Bucky Fuller, and Marshall McLuhan on July the 6th in 1963 on the deck of New Hellas, which just before departing for this 8-day trip to Aegean archipelagos at the beginning of the first Delos Symposium. Fuller, which is, yes, we all know who is Fuller, again, anyway. Fuller was a close associate and friend of Doxiadis, being a prominent contributor to almost every Delos Symposium, and was using the communication network as a model for architecture since the late 1920s, being an architect and inventor. Marshall McLuhan was a communication expert that shared Fuller's view on technology as the extension of human body since his encounter with Fuller. Fuller's idea, this is not going well. Sorry about that. So Fuller's idea, first introduced in his first but not well-known book, Nine Chains to the Moon, in 1930. Sorry. So Fuller's idea on this was firstly introduced in the first but not well-known book, Nine Chains to the Moon, in 1938, and McLuhan's shared anthropocentric conception of media as an extension of the human body was first published in his book, Understanding Media, The Extension of Man, in 1964, which practically was a year after their encounter. For Wigley, the Delos Symposia were all about networks, conceived as the old elements of settlement, that all these networks should incorporate in the discourse of should be incorporated in the discourse of future urbanism. Fuller, along his idea of close affinity between technology and human body, strongly believed that traditional architecture should have been set aside in favor of a worldwide dwelling service network, as Wigley argues. In the same framework, Fuller's approach on urban growth had been conceived as an almost immaterial world of dense flows of energy, people, food, minerals, and other resources projected on a very different map, the Dymaxion map. Dymaxion map, yes, I'm using the correct word, in which the planet had been represented as one world island in one world ocean without any boundaries, any contours between the different, any breaks between the different continents. For Nick Katsikis, Doxiadis and Fuller aimed at tackling global urbanization and the associated population growth, land management, resource allocation, and environmental degradation using radical design agendas grounded merely on scientific rationality and systematic epistemological knowledge. The socio-political aspects of urban space were, it was argued, neglected. In particular, Katsikis argues that the Ekistics approach to urban development neglected to consider the fundamental political character of special relations under modern capitalism. This argument, to me, echoes French philosopher and sociologist Henri Lefebvre's problematic on speciality, which had been explicitly and reflexively political. His famous thesis aphorism, there is a politics of space because space is political, leaves no room for any misunderstanding. Brennan and Eldon attempted to clarify this a little bit further by suggesting that it is precisely because patterns of special organization continue to have such strategic significance to capital states, and, I attempted to clarify this, I'm lost here. So let's clarify what we mean by there is politics of space because space is political. According to Bremen and Elden, they suggest that this is precisely because patterns of special organization continue to have such strategic significance to capital, states, and social forces at all scales that such many concerted political strategies are being mobilized to reshape them. Now, at the heart of this critique, as described, lies the suggestion of ekistics as being a theory that had been produced by a scientific elite. It had been implied that the glamour intellectuals, according to Times Magazine as Richard's records, trying to impose their authority on real habitats, ignoring the actual forces that produced and reproduced them. Now, along this theory, his theoretical endeavors related to globality of the urbanism and his futuristic schemes, Doxiadis established his firm, Doxiadis Associates, upon his return to Athens from Australia in 1953. He had built up his portfolio over the years with contracts for city and regional planning settlement schemes, infrastructure projects, and national housing plans in countries in the Middle East, Pakistan, or Africa. And based on his extensive work of international contacts and friends, he posed himself as one of the most prominent international consultants till his death in 1975. Talking about these real-life projects, very early in his career as a planner, that is soon after he established his consultancy firm, actually in 1955, and until 1958, Doxiadis was commissioned in a series of housing and public urban urban places design schemes by the Iraqi regime in his attempt for decolonization and nation building, as Panagiotta Pilla records. For all his work in Iraq, Pilla highlights Doxiadis was using a technocratic posture of neutrality that, along his ideas of social reform and regional particularity, served the local regime aspiration for an alert modernization, which in this case could be translated in the westernization of the nation. In 1958, Doxiadis Associates, that is the firm, was assigned the Baghdad New Master Plan to accommodate the fast growth of the city by the Iraq Development Board. This board, as we know from Pilla's work, was a semi-governmental organization that administered the program of modernization of the nation, creating linkages with the West by employing Western consultants and world-known architects like Le Corbusier, Gropius, Alto, and so on. And the A's, Doxiadis Associates' promise to the regime and the nation was to provide a sound framework for further growth and development and housing for all. Its approach to urban development and expansion was based on the concept of linear extension of the city, according to the model of Dianapolis, as Panagiotta Pilla highlights. Doxiadis Associates identified Tigris River as a convenient northwest-southeast axis, central axis, along which a sensible growth limited to 3 million people, though, could be achieved. Housing and central activity sectors were predicted within a rectangular grid system, which had been emerged from a system of new and old roads that connect the city to the rest of the country. Now, Doxiadis Associates' involvement in Western Baghdad development scheme. So, the firm was involved in one part of the city, in one of the housing sectors. That it was about a population of 100,000 people, and they created a system of communities separated into small socio-special units arranged hierarchically. According to Panagiotta, Doxiadis was arguing that the lower class of communities, that is, the smaller communities, correspond to sizes found in Iraqi towns and villages, they were found, yes, to the traditional way of living, while the larger communities were presented as something new that was dictated, if you like, by the advances of transportation and communication. The aim that they organized it in such a way, they wanted to promote and control intermixing between social classes with the ultimate quest for social balance among the citizens. Now, Panagiotou Pilla clearly argued about the failure of Doxiadis' associate proposals for the scheme. The design failed to understand and incorporate the social transformation being an intrinsic characteristic of the city, which had an immediate consequence, the creation of an administrative ordering of local society by only accommodating visual and aesthetics requirements. So let's keep this in mind. Then furthermore, since 1957, Doxiadis had an extensive involvement in several planning and housing schemes in Iran. As we learned from Madanipur report on this, highlights that Doxiadis' work on Tehran Action Plan for the Tehran Action Plan he was commissioned in 1972 by the Plan Organization to facilitate future investment on the public and private sectors in a systematic way, and therefore they were trying to find, Doxiadis was trying to find a progressive solution to emerging cities' problem because of this growth. Did it make sense what I said? Because in my mind, what they've done is that they were commissioned to create the action plan for Tehran in order to facilitate the desired investment from public and private sector in a systematic way. This they were thinking, the authorities and Doxiadis were thinking that this will gradually solve the problems of the city. Overall, 31 problems were identified, with the main concern to be about the rapid and hazardous growth of the city center due to existing restriction because of the climatic conditions that existed and the physical obstacles that they were in the east part of the city, the south, and the north. This uncontrolled and inevitable growth of the city center was leading to heavy traffic congestion, to air pollution, to high concentration of activities within a confined space. For Doxiadis, the emerging solution was to guide the growth of the city to the west, failing to address, though, the institutional and social complexities of interdependencies between the new parts and the old parts of a city, according to Madanipur. So he suggests that the failure of Doxiadis' plan to capture the dynamic growth of the city was partly due to the actual restrictions of regulations and time remaining for the action, and partly due to the gap between theory and practice. He argues that the solutions applied by Doxiadis and its associates were the product of premeditated theoretical proposals. His concern about Doxiadis' practical approach to inevitability to this particular project and to this city growth is that he finds some paradox, like the one between the advocation of natural growth or the evolution of the city, but the desire to control it in a way. Another paradox that he highlights is the belief of importance of contextual information of it and the use of ready-made solutions. And another one was that he was interested to incorporate the contextual information, but at the same time he was interested to break this context and make something completely different, if you like. And although Madanipur suggests that there is always this these differences between what exists in theory, in the theoretical framework, and what is applied or implemented in practice. In his idea, this difference between identifies that in the essence of Doxiadis' theoretical and practical approach is the neglection of the social dimension of the city. So if we would like to summarize here is that the critique, first of all, it was about that there was a theory that promoted technology fetishism. It has used radical design agendas neglecting the socio-political urban spaces, or it was promoting radical design agendas. It was a theory that was produced by a scientific elite that didn't care about what's happening in the real world, or they wanted to impose their authority and their ideas. And as far as the practical projects are concerned, is that the planner failed to understand the social formation of the city in the case of Baghdad, and in the case of Tehran, the planner used ready-made, off-the-rack solutions, ready-made solutions, and practically neglected the social formation and the social aspects of the city. So the techno-focused arguments and the ostensible negligence of social formation transformation of the political character of urban space are counterbalanced, if you like, from Richard's argument of Doxiadis' approach being more pluralistic than it is given credit for. Richard highlights that although Doxiadis is recorded to be concerned with planning at a planetary scale, he is at the same time committed to the smallest, most intimate scales of architecture as well. In fact, Doxiadis' description and understanding of special and socio-economic conditions is often accompanied with some personal annotation recorded in a diary. This creates a carefully crafted personal narrative each time of the social and special situation that comes across. The approach is highlighted in this design approach, if you like, of Doxiadis is mentioned and highlighted both in Panagiotis' work about Baghdad and Madanibus. On the basis now of criticism against the ekistics for this presentation, on the basis of this criticism against ekistics, for this presentation revisits ekistics upon its birth in late 40s, exploring the anthropocentric dimension of ekistics, if any, through Doxiadis' abundance of writings, and it tries to explore its affinities with other theories as well. So let's go back to the basics and where the whole story started. So as early as 1942, the term ekistics was first coined to describe an aspired science that would explain the complex nature of human settlements and the revolution in space, and a long time by Doxiadis himself at one of his lectures at the National Technical University of Athens. This is recorded by Pertsamidis, who worked as an architect and as a planner for Doxiadis Associates from 1971 until 1979. Both Pertsamidis and Bromley highlighted that the initial conception of ekistics took place while Doxiadis was engaged in the post-war construction of Greece, having experienced the destruction of the ekistics wealth at that time. It was then he became persuaded that human settlements could be subject to a systematic investigation. During that time, a series of booklets were written reporting on the destruction and proposing immediate and long-term solutions. Just before, that is, during the wartime and the German and Italian occupation of Athens, Doxiadis, as being the leader of the town planning office, along his team, gathered detailed data on housing stock and Greek settlements that permitted accurate action in the form of a 5-year reconstruction program from 1948 till 1952, that Marshall Plan helped to be materialized. So essentially, ekistics had been used or had been formed in a way to support and orient this effort, and as Bromley suggested. However, although ekistics as a concept was inherently present in these studies, and therefore in this series of publications that it was produced during that time, it was only in 1968, with the book Ekistics, An Introduction to the Science of Human Settlements, that Doxiadis incorporated all the ideas and the body of acquired knowledge during all these years into an integrated, organized system. So Papaioannou now, a close friend and associate of Doxiadis, reporting about the group discussions that were taking place in the town planning office, highlighted the tendency towards a global multidisciplinary approach concerning the physical space and other dimensions of human settlements, such as the social structure of communities within them and economics. The latter, that is economics, according to his account, was considered to be the driving force for the creation and development of human settlements. In the first booklet, Ekistic Analysis, that it was published in 1946, and it was produced as an amalgamation of all these group discussions in the town planning office, it was clearly stated that the human settlements were analyzed not only as static technical artifacts, but were investigating, considering their causal relation with the environment within which had been formed. This suggested approach was bearing similarities with physical and political geography. Further on the new approach, ekistics is explicitly said to be a science that was being formulated through an evolution process. It was described as a science that was comprised of other sciences like town planning and building science, and I'm now translating the term κτηριολογία that Doxiadis has used. And at the same time, ekistics was a component of country planning, χωροταξία. In Doxiadis' words, ekistics is a science that studies the settlements in general, and in particular the distribution of settlements in space, the location and size of each, and the influence of one on the other. Ekistics is a branch of country planning, χωροταξία. And I have translated myself this bit because all these publications that they were produced around that time was in Greek. With this diagram that Doxiadis used to clarify the influences and therefore the origins of country planning, it is clear to the reader and to everyone that sees that the process within which ekistics has emerged as well was a complex interplay between different disciplines that were all about distribution of land, distribution of people. The concept now, from this publication, we keep in mind the concept of socio-ekistic forms that emerges as one very important element that needed to be studied thoroughly according to Doxiadis. This concept was clarified as the effect of social relations which are developed within human settlements on man's perception and behavior. And this entity describes, in my mind and my reading, the interrelation between social dynamic, physical space, and individuals' or the man's attitude and towards space. Doxiadis' prompting to practitioners for taking into consideration people's aspiration for the environment that surrounds them is evident in very later from this first appearance of the new science of ekistics. In his published work in 1968, when ekistics is crystallized now as the new science of human settlements. Doxiadis, in Man's Movement and His City article, published in 1968, urged urban scholars and practitioners to understand humanity beyond its mere physical activity within space by cooperating in the study of how people perceive space with all their senses. In this article, Doxiadis highlighted that the final goal of an urban planner would be the satisfaction of the man that lives within cities, and therefore planners should understand both the city and the man and his needs. He further clarified that urban scholars and practitioners should understand man beyond its physical activity within physical space. This, which means practically beyond from what he's doing in the space. This could be possible by embracing how the man perceives space with all his senses. So in his words, we read that an understanding of man requires the ability to see him not only as our eyes see him, that is, as a body or a body plus clothing, but as a system of concentric spheres. And here is a direct link with Edward Hall's bubbles, human bubbles. So he says it explicitly. The system starts with a sphere representing what man sees, but this sphere expands to include what he smells or hears, and expands again to include the space that his mind encompasses, and again to include the space that his soul or psyche encompasses. So we were talking this in 1968. Now we're going a little bit further, saying about anthropokosmos in 1972. And we can see the similarities between his ideas of the man. Now he's changing from a man to something else, which is the total man. So in Anthropokosmos, the world of man, in this book that Simon showed you, the man is concerned as all his body and senses and mind and sentiments, feelings and aspiration, and none of these elements could be separated from each other, but they all operate together in health and in sickness, in his own words. For Doxiadis, the mind might be stimulated through the rhythmical movement of the body while it occupies rhythmical space. However, to date, the senses were neglected, as according to what he says. So the man's body and soul was developing only according to the commands on the mind. In Doxiadis' reasoning, by neglecting this total man, the human society was running the risk of turning itself into a group of monsters that obliterate one another, and the only solution for it had been to work for the development of the total man. For this reason, he suggests employing the anthropics as the science of man. The latter is directly related and explicitly related to, because he mentioned it several times, to Alexis Carrel and his Science of Man, as Doxiadis explicitly described it in several articles that he produced around that time, like the two-headed eagle in Ekistics or the formation of human room. So, who is Alex Carrel? Being a surgeon and biologist, Alex Carrel wrote an extensive account of what is known and unknown about human body and human lives in the light of advancements of the science of physics, biology, and medicine, with his ultimate goal to help ameliorate people's lives. So he urged the academic world to shift the focus from the world of inert matter to the world of organic processes that have created life. In his book, Man the Unknown, Carrel explicitly expressed his idea's relevance to the Aristotelian universal knowledge. Following the same reasoning, Doxiadis argued about the need for considering the totality of the man, and therefore for seeking a composite science of habitable space. Now, Doxiadis' anthropocentric approach was further deployed by his attempt to decode the happiness that the total man feels. He was interested in quantifiable human happiness that could be measured according to the quantity of satisfaction felt by the total man in relation to the different aspects of whom it consisted. This statement was explained that one man can feel unhappy because it's physically in pain, or his senses suffer, or through stresses exercised on his mind and soul. So man's happiness depends on the alleviation of the stresses he is subject to within his social environment or within himself, in his words. So happiness quotient, or HQ, could measure the total man's capacity to happiness that either lies within himself or is it acquired by training. Now, anthropokosmos, in simpler word, is the relationship between the total man and the space, which is something like halfway between the electron and the universe, as he says. The world of man, or the cosmos of man, consists of 5 elements: nature, man, society, function, and shells, and is ordered according to 5 principles, as we see from this article that he produced, The Formation of Human Room. So according to these 5 principles, the man is the moving man actually, is the main agent that chooses how to use space and how to behave in space according to these 5 principles. So the moving man maximizes the potential of contacts. Then in the second diagram tries to show that the moving man selects the most convenient routes. The third principle is that he optimizes his protective space. The fourth principle is that he optimizes the quality of his relations with his environment. So the total man is embedded in his environment. And the fifth principle is that he optimizes the synthesis of the 4 previous principles. Yes, I will try to be quick. So we've seen the man, we've seen the total man, we've seen what is the relation of the total man with his surrounding, which is anthropokosmos, and now society. Society had been put in the framework of anthropokosmos in Doxiadis' internal article that was produced in November 1964 under the title Considerations of the Great Society. The notion of a great society for Doxiadis is the Aristotelian one, that is the one which is happy and secure. And happy and secure society occurs when 2 conditions are met. First one is the balance between the part of the society, that is the individuals and groups, and the hierarchical structure of these elements, or else the organization that he calls internal balance. The second condition is a reciprocal balance of society with all other ekistician elements, namely the man, the nature, the function, and the shells. This is called external balance. The role of a proactive urban planner in order to prepare society for greatness is first to understand the problems, then to conceive solutions, and then to produce policies and programs that finally to implement them. So consider the conceptual framework of anthropokosmos. Man felt isolated and confused in the modern city. Doxiadis argued that the man felt isolated due to the loss of some degree of human contacts. Modern cities became sparser, and thus natural human contacts were fewer. The man became dependent on his car and on the advancement of telecommunication for basic function in his everyday life, but this could not have been replaced the physical contact with other people, and this lack of co-presence made the modern man exposed to neuroses and psychoses. For Doxiadis, the feeling of safety as well, so the feeling of happiness, was lost in this modern city. The feeling of safety as well was lost. The recovery from this loss was possible only through the preservation of nature and all of its resources and the preservation of man's inborn diversity that a free democratic society could promote. A free democratic society, that's the term that he used, which will allow for the survival of the greatest variety of individuals. Every single individual should have felt and be safe on the premise that this could guarantee that no one else should have lost the feeling of happiness, and vice versa. This answer to the loss of safety issues could lead to different environments that will allow different degrees of safety. Doxiadis hoped for a habitat that would encourage the best balance between a controlled and uncontrolled environment, and therefore an environment that would offer a maximum safety and yet could create the potential for the total man's happiness. This dynamic relationship and its balance is indispensable for lasting happiness. For Doxiadis, unhappy and safe total man belonging to a well-balanced society could play a positive role in the future of urban life. His envisioned role was that of the orchestration of this fine-tuning process. Doxiadis' faith in the human and its needs and capabilities at the same time is a recurrent theme in all his writing reviewed so far. However, in his proposed model of a world of man is embedded within a global system, an environment that has many components and bears a dialectic or causal relationship with every single one of its components. In this framework, we could understand Papaioanou's remark about the new value system and the produced model of development that the Ekistics was providing distant itself from the anthropocentric models of the past. So what Papaioannou says in 2013 is that a broad consideration of the environmental issue on this planet leads to a progressive change of values. The past and present anthropocentric model of the biosphere, where all its constituents, flora, faunas, landscape, etc., are valued according to their utility, economic or other practical value for man, is seen as having to give way gradually to a broader value system. The world does not exist simply to serve man. It has its own value in a conception of new ethics, world ethics. Man does not exist just to exploit the red of the biosphere, which has an inherent right to life, preservation, and respect. Man has to integrate himself in the global system of the biosphere. Beyond the techno-epistemological determinism that many have highlighted regarding this approach for the development of the world and the ostensible negligence of different aspects of human life, it is suggested that the Ekistics, upon its conception, has inherent anthropocentric dimension. Moreover, it was his faith, Doxiadis' faith in human capacities for change, along with his interest in the environment itself, that brought Doxiadis together with other prominent scholars and internationalists like Margareta Mead or Barbara Ward to work together, setting the founding of what was later defined as sustainable development. On the other hand, it was exactly Doxiadis' close association with these scholars and their shared vision on globality as a terrain of interaction for a better world developing extreme futuristic model of the world, like the planet Earth spaceship, that shifted the focus of Ekistics and of research about it. Now, how relevant could Ekistics be to today? I would say like a very small hint, because I don't have much time. So current urban discourse and practices are being driven partly by vast demographic pressures, mainly caused by forced migration, and partly by a scientific community that speak up about climate change. In practice, the increased residential mobility of the last decades has challenged decision makers and urban designers to create urban environments that would accommodate demographic growth and enable new means of economic and social development, bearing always an ecological footprint. European Commission's action plan for the urban and regional planning that prioritizes the integration of migrants as a key to future well-being and cohesion of European societies is indicative of the emphasis given on the human element of this procedure. I would very briefly argue that in this fast-changing world, sharing Ekistician axiom that a great society is the one that every single individual of it feels happy and safe could yield some useful insights to create recognizable and valued places that people would like to live and work in. Thank you very much, and I'm open to any clarifications.